Okay, we'll get started. We've reached the top of the hour. Thank you for attending today's live webinar, Quality Metrics, What You Need to Know. Leading the discussion is Infinity QS Vice President of Statistical Methods, Steve Wise. My name is Ed Van Rens, Infinity QS Marketing Communication Manager, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. Steve is a renowned industry expert and co-author of the book Innovative Control Charting, published by ASQ Press. With his background in industrial statistics and 25 years of manufacturing experience, Steve's focus is on enterprise manufacturing intelligence and helping companies use statistical methods to improve performance and profitability. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping items. First, Steve's prepared notes have a 45-minute runtime. After that, we will have 15 minutes for Q&A. I encourage you to take advantage of this time by asking specific questions about how to use data more effectively at your location. To do so, use the Q&A tab in the drop-down at the top of your screen. I will also be monitoring the chat tab if you have any other questions or comments. Again, thank you for your time. And now, Steve Wise.
Ed, thanks so much for those kind words, introduction. Yes, today, welcome everybody. We'll be spending the next 45 minutes together talking about metrics, and we're going to divide our discussion up into 4 parts. Now, this discussion is actually based on an ebook that I wrote and was published through Infinity QS back in March. And so, take advantage now, if you haven't done so already, to go out to our website and download this ebook. But today, the 4 parts are going to be dealing with the first is how we can increase visibility around and our credibility using quality metrics. And by using the quality metrics, they help expose hidden gems in our processes. And also, we'll talk about performance, profitability, and productivity are just natural byproducts when everyone is working with the same scoreboard. Everyone knows what the score is, and so we all tend to pull together and do the right things more commonly. Also, when we're dealing in the world of metrics, those are measurement driven. So knowing what to measure, it actually becomes key. And then to get the maximum return on the efforts that you'll be putting into maintaining quality metrics, we must rely on people, processes, and technology. So we'll be addressing those areas. We'll also be getting into answering several questions. So questions like, what are the right metrics to use, and how can I best communicate my metrics and findings through the company organization all the way up to top management, as well as what metrics do other departments need from quality. So how do I know that I'm feeding the right information to the right folks? And then what should I consider when I implement quality metrics, and more. So with that, let's get started in with part 1, and that's increasing visibility around quality builds credibility. So there is a marketing research group that we use quite a bit internally, and some of your companies may as well. It's a very well-known market research group named Gartner. They're out of Boston, and they recently published an article, and inside that paper, they stated that outside of finance, there's no business discipline that touches and impacts more organizational functions than quality. So whether or not people in different organizations can see it, product quality affects everyone. And we all know that just one negative quality incident could literally jeopardize the entire corporation's existence.
Member of the Infinity
and so when we think about that, we kind of think about recall. And as I was preparing for this webinar, I just did a quick little search on Google to find out what are some recent recalls that we've had. Because recalls have huge negative effects on companies. Well, one of the recalls that we probably all saw in the major news headlines is that back in March, there are 250,000 Hondas that were recalled due to braking problems. But if you dig into this, what other recalls that are out there, you'll find all sorts of things get recalled, actually get published. They just don't make it to the major headlines. So here's where a lot of Swiss Army knives got recalled due to cracked barrels. 130,000 snorkel masks got recalled back in March. 5,000 plus snow blowers had recalls due to escaping gas issues. 19,000, believe it or not, Justice brand disco lights got recalled. I mean, and these are items that have actually been published and have been documented and posted on the internet. And how many people's lives get affected? People that work at the Justice Disco Lights Company, 19,000 of those being recalled. Can they withstand that hit? I don't know. Hello Kitty motor scooters got recalled, if you can believe it. Almost 11,000 of those. And so these are only the recalls that get noticed by the press. any one of us that have worked in companies, especially manufacturing companies, you know very well that recalls that make it out into the field are just the tip of the iceberg. There's any number of lots that get rejected and products that must be destroyed because they didn't meet specification limit, or things get shipped late and paying penalties, and all the hidden factory activities that go on because of the cost of poor quality. So these recalls don't tell the whole story. So what can manufacturing professionals do now to ensure that quality is seen as an integral part of the entire product life cycle? How can quality become more of a cost of doing business, or become more than just a cost of doing business, instead become a real differentiator between companies? What metrics about quality should the entire organization have front and center? So one way is let's start with some conversation starters. These are some questions you might want to ask yourselves, ask people around you. If you're in the business of collecting metrics these days, you may want to challenge what you're doing. First of all, are your metrics doing their job? What questions have you been trying to answer, and are the metrics providing you answers to those questions? Have your questions changed over time, and have you updated your metrics to provide that? Can you correlate your activities and metrics back to the profitability? That's a key point. That drives it back to return on investment. Also, what upstream activities affect your outgoing quality? There's all sorts of things that are happening upstream that we may not know about, that we're fighting, but if we don't have visibility in that, we can't fix it. We don't know what's happening. We're just dealing with the problems. And are you zeroing in on the right areas? Are they giving you the best insights? And then lastly, how do you know if everyone is trying to improve the right things? And so with that, there's an area of opportunity that's actually ever expanding in the risk of dealing with quality data. And so that kind of gets into why is now the right time for quality metrics, and maybe why is now the right time to rethink what you're doing with your quality metrics. Well, front and center is things have changed. Even in the past 10 years, even 5 years, we've become much more global, flat, 24/7. You can go through Kohl's and Walmart and other major retailers, and it's obvious and it's well-known fact that most of the products that you see on the shelves are made overseas. And even today, we have the luxury of taking advantage of those lower prices, because even on eBay and Amazon, we can buy direct from China and from Indonesia and other places that the large retailers have been taking advantage of. So we're all kind of getting into this global game, if you will. But with that, these days production rarely occurs at a single site, and supplies, for a product, even if it has a stamp on it that's U.S. made, supplies can still come from all over the globe. And each added step in the supply chain contains risks. It increases the likelihood that the product or subcomponents or associated workflows will fail to meet specifications. Schedules get affected, and all results in increased costs and problems to deal with. So a true enterprise operation needs to own and track product quality across the whole process, inside and outside their factory walls, and even outside the company. And so back to this, still a statistical term, the area of opportunity for risk is ever expanding. Also, the challenge is dealing with data models. We've evolved over the years with bringing in various technologies to work on different areas of the company, and each type of system that we put in place has their own way of managing and storing the data. And so over the years, we've got our enterprise resource planning systems, our manufacturing execution systems, laboratory information management systems, and various other systems that are out there, and they all have a very important and distinct purpose in life. But as we start the need of critical multi-site junctions of data to get these quality metrics, the data needs to talk one to another and pass information. But when we open the hood and find out what's going on with the data models, this ERP system is organized to look like apples, and MES looks like oranges, and the LIMS system looks like ducks. And so how do we take the data that was organized to do different things to get it to talk to one another? So as the drive for metrics becomes more important, the drive to solve this problem also becomes paramount, and there's solutions to it. Also, we are forever dealing with a more informed buyer, that the messaging that the company has to say on their quality is no longer a one-sided message. And they can't, the message quality is number one, customer is number one. If you don't believe it, read the slogan again. That's gone, and that's because of social media and the way our buying habits have evolved over time, that any person anywhere in the world has a mouthpiece to promote or tear down a company's goodwill and address what they think about the quality. So a lot of the websites that we buy from, we have the ability to read reviews, good and bad. We learn from that. We're becoming informed. We have social media that we can talk about our experiences with various companies. Amazon's out there, other various ways that we have to promote what we think about the quality and to learn about products that we're about to purchase. So as a company, these are all challenges that we need to deal with. So how do we organize our metrics to address these challenges? Well, if we look at a traditional model, then we start at the top. We've got a company vision that we promote at the top. And this company vision, they all kind of revolve around a certain level of we want to make money, we need to be safe when we're doing it, we want to gain market share, and we have to have happy employees. And so this vision gets published, and then the next level down, that will then drive divisional initiatives. So at the division level, we come up with initiatives that will meet that company vision, and that flows down to the site. So the site establishes programs that comply with the initiatives at the division level. And then at the department level, we have plans of how we're going to meet the requirements of the programs and initiatives that meet the vision. And then we get down to the process where the work gets done, and that's where the requirements get put into place. So and from my perspective, when I talk about process, I'm talking about activities that have inputs and outputs. And so more specifically, the process requirements are on those outputs. And so we try to, of course, control the inputs so we meet those process outputs. So by working this approach, we hope that these lower level activities actually are going to positively affect what's happening at the highest level, that we can actually make a difference. And this is a traditional top-down focus. And so the goal always is going to be to harmlessly make boatloads of money while joyfully squashing our competitors. But we hope we're achieving that when we're down at the process level. So let's take this let's use the same top-down approach, but let's bring it down a little bit to something that we all probably can relate to a little more than this high-level models. And that is, let's pretend like we're going to build something. It's more specifically what we're going to do is we're going to build an electric motor. So in order to do that, we're going to first start out with some components. And so as we start assembling these components, we're very careful with the assembly. We don't skip any of the steps. We follow our instructions. We use the right tooling. We verify everything along the way that we're doing it right, and we're doing it right the first time. And so now we have our subcomponent assembly. Everything seems to have performed to the plan that we followed. The next step is to make the final assembly. And ultimately what we're trying to do is get to a finished product that then we can test. The whole goal, the whole vision that we're trying to focus on is downstream to that testing to make to see if it's all going to work. And we don't know yet. So we reach the pinnacle of our activities, we plug that motor in, and nothing happens. Instantly, the alarms go off, everything changes gears. The focus now is not top down, the focus now becomes top up. And so now we're looking at all the value streams and looking at the suppliers and finding out, did a problem happen during this value stream? Did this supplier, what happened there? And these components over here? And did we follow the right operations? And so this is a top-up type of approach. And because of this activity that we have engaged in, we actually have discovered a few things. And so this bottom-up approach allowed us to discover that these three areas were problems. Now, I'm kind of cheating. At the top-down approach, we've painted a direction, we've steered the ship in the place that we want to go, and then we're trying to execute to the plan. This, however, is kind of cheating. We have hindsight to work with. It's 2020. We now are going to go back upstream and try to find out where the problems are. And so, but we forever have opportunities for hindsight, and we have 2020 working in our favor always. And so, if that's the case, take it to use it to your advantage and use this top-up approach. But here, if we keep talking, driving our story here, we find out that upstream somewhere, this product was actually rejected. It went into an MRB cage, a material review board cage, but it got dispositioned as used as is. So they put it back into the flow and kept building with it. But we now know there were problems with that, so we're going to put some metric on there to track it with time to make sure that problem doesn't come back anymore. This product was a material substitute, and as we dug in, we realized that the supplier of the proper material was in a contract dispute with our buyers because they were trying to squabble over price. So in the meantime, we had to meet schedule, and so therefore there was a material substitute put in place. When that, we had some issues with that, so now we're going to track it and make sure that problem doesn't come back. And this happens to be through more research is winding. We found out that the supplier looked at the flow of how it was supposed to go together, and they found some problems with it, so they changed the workflow. They did the winding in a little bit different sequence than what was per the plan. However, the consumers of this product assume they follow the plan. Well, it caused problems, so we're going to monitor that and track that as well. But ultimately, we use our hindsight to figure out where the problems are, and we get a motor out of this system that works. And then we get another one that works, and another one that works. And so after a while, we have a very consistent process that's producing good things. So this all sounds really nice on paper, right? The idea of looking upstream, finding out where the problems are, putting some place or tags in there, if you will, into the data streams and track them to make sure the problems don't come back. But it doesn't always work out that way. That there are issues. There's going to be pushback when you start going upstream to point fingers and find problems, and it actually does turn into a finger-pointing exercise. So if you go to the sales group and tell them, they need to do their business different, they're going to push right back to quality and say the quality problems are yours, and you're delaying the shipment. And don't forget, no shipping, no money. And we all can appreciate that. No one really gets paid until we ship things, and so that is a very critical point that the sales team is pointing out. But production is going to push back and say, well, you promised your promised design changes were held up in engineering due to inadequate design specifications. So production's delayed; they can't meet the ship date. Well, engineering is going to come back and say, why do you keep sending parts in MRB? You're wasting our time. So it's just back and forth. Well, if you give us the right specs, then we wouldn't necessarily have to reject everything, and we wouldn't have to go into the use as is mode. So you're wasting our time. So telling other people how to do their job is a tricky part of this if you're going to go upstream, but it's got to get done. And the way it gets done is through metrics and getting that scoreboard that we can all keep focused on. So if we look at that model again, back up before we get to the model. If we, just like the motor example, where the goal was to plug it up and make sure it worked, that's the pinnacle of the activities we're performing. And a lot of enterprises where we're trying to make money, what we're shooting for is to get shipments out. And we want to get shipments on time with the right quality level so that we can get paid. And so if we keep that focus, let's look at our model again, but yet let's look at it from a bottom-up approach. So if we first start out with the inputs and outputs, and based on our hindsight logic, we now have a pretty good idea of what types of things we should be measuring. And based on that, then that now pushes it upstream to the department and says, well, if we're going to measure these things and they need it at the process level, we need to incorporate certain activities and clear the fields and block down or take down some walls so the process guys can get what they need. And so there's activities that start happening at the process or the department level. Well, then that kind of goes up to the site leaders. They've got some responsibilities to make sure they support their departments and get out of the way and make sure they have the tools they need at the department level to get their job done. So the site responsibilities might change a bit, and that goes up to divisional initiatives. So the initiatives might change as well based on the feedback they're seeing downstream, which then ultimately feed up to the company goals. So this bottom-up approach, I submit, can still go towards the goals and the vision of making money, being safe, gaining market share, having happy employees. But I would submit that this is a viable approach, and in some ways, and maybe in a lot of ways, it's a better approach than the top-down approach. So we've talked quite a bit about in this part one. So some lessons that we've learned is that we know that quality affects everyone, whether we realize it or not, whether we have any visibility in our own world of how quality affects us, it does affect us. And that the customer has always been number one. It was in the past, it still is today. But we just have more educated consumers that are out there, so it can't just be a one-way messaging anymore. And metrics provide that visibility beyond just the role of quality. We can't look at quality as just something that lives in the quality department. And that visibility improves what gets measured and reported. And then lastly, we've got the advantage of hindsight. Let's use it to our advantage. So that leads us into the next part of our discussion, and that is that performance, profitability, and productivity increases when everyone knows the score. So let's, if we're going to get a scoreboard, and the scoreboard is going to be based on metrics, then what are metrics? We've talked about the term. Let's define a bit about what they are. Well, metrics are the scoreboard that people watch, and metrics are things or numbers and output that link activity to feedback, and that the shorter the interval between activity and feedback, the better. So, back in the days when I worked for a large airframe company, I learned that aircrafts, when they're flying in the air, they're actually off course 97% of the time. But because of the autopilot is always adjusting and correcting. And so the feedback is almost instantaneous. So even though the plane wants to fly off course, we're always trying to bring it back on course. And so if they waited and corrected their place on their route every 5 minutes, it'd be a much different flight, much different time to get to where you need to go. So it's instant feedback. Another example, we've got one of our daughters that's in an after-school math program, and they have little packets of work they do, 5 pages of work they do each night in the math. And the first set of instructions was after the child finishes the 5 pages of work, the parent does the grading and gives the feedback to the child that night. Well, later on, the instruction was just kind of hang around, and every 2 or 3 problems that the child finishes, do the grading and provide the feedback. And what we found out when we did that is the learning happened much faster because they're correcting the mistakes much, much quicker. So our goal is to always, if you're collecting metric, the time between the activity and the feedback, the shorter that time you can make, the better. So since we're talking about what makes a good metric, let's look at some other attributes of a good metric. So one of the attributes is it's bidirectional, meaning that it provides value upstream and downstream. So, for example, if we go back to the airplane flying off course, 97% of the time, if we're monitoring the effectiveness of that autopilot, the upstream benefit is that the people that are doing the flight scheduling, the people that are designing the autopilots, they're getting feedback of how to make things better tomorrow. But in the real time, the passengers are getting the most efficient flight possible. The value of the feedback system through Amazon is the feedback can help the suppliers provide better products based on what their customers are saying, but it also helps us as consumers make better decisions. So those are both very excellent types of metrics that help people upstream and downstream. The other type of metric is we want it to be customer specific, and so the metrics are organized or customized by the user. So if you're collecting metrics, like say on allergen containment, and those are very important metrics to collect. If you're reporting this up, it doesn't need to be bundled up with someone who's dealing with the art department details on the packaging of the goods. So you want to customize the metrics to whoever the customers are and report it in such a way. Now, those of you that have listened to me in the past, you know that I'm a big believer in data having 2 lives. The first life of the data is the real time. So we collect the data. We use that data to make decisions of do something now or don't do anything right now. That's the real-time life of the data. But if you collect it correctly and the data are tagged properly, and I'll get more into what I mean by tagged properly, it actually has a second life, and it becomes a post-analytical, mining tool to where you can use that data to figure out how to make things better tomorrow. So there's, the real-time value has different customers than the second life of the data, but they both can be extremely valuable. The other type of attribute is it's objective and measurable. So a continuous scale, if you can measure something on a continuous scale, that's much better than pass-fail. And even having a scale of hot, warm, and cold is better than a scale of hot and cold. So anything that you can do to provide some continuous scale, if you will, in the data scale, the better off you are. But to a point, you don't want to go crazy with it. And because movement needs to be meaningful, and that means that you've got to have the right data on the right scale. So if you've got a scale, say, of 1 to 100, and you get a reading that comes in, your metric comes in at let's say 27. You get a 27, and then you measure it again, then you get a value of 30. Well, and no one does anything. So, and that's because if there's no operational definition between 27 and 30, then the scale's the wrong scale. You need to maybe go through a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, through 10, a 1 through 10 scale instead. You don't need 100 degrees of resolution in there. On the same token, if a value comes in at 27, and then the next time it comes in at 65, and no one does anything, that exposes a different problem. Either no one's looking, no one's watching the data, so no one does anything. It's the wrong data. It's not answering the question someone's trying to get to. So again, no one's looking at the wrong data. It could mean no one trusts the value, so they know all the shenanigans that may have gone into that number, so they can't use it to make any business decisions. So there's any number of reasons why people might ignore the data, or it's being distributed to the wrong people that can use it. So look at it. If you're reporting something and no one's using it, making decisions on it, then find out what the problem is there as well. So just because you may have collected a metric that was important yesterday, it doesn't mean it's as important today. So the metrics need to have a sunset, if you will, if they've served their purpose. So back to the metrics need to have a place to live. They need to be tagged to the right information. And that's where this metric hierarchy is necessary if you're going to roll things up. From the process level up to the company level, there needs to be some way to tag anything coming at the process level up to the area and department, site, division, and company. So data must be identified in a structured manner to make it visible throughout. So these terms that you're seeing here, this isn't something that Infinity QS came up with. We actually thought it was a pretty good idea based on a standard called the S95, and that's a standard for integration of enterprise and control systems. And we feel that those types of integration and control systems deal with massive amounts of data, and if there's a standard against it, and we looked at this model, we thought it was pretty good. So in our quality hub, where our Perficient product manages quality records, that data are organized in this manner. So as an example, this would be a screenshot from our software. We've got a company called Boltco, and then at the very bottom of the list, we have processes called Lathe 167 and Lathe 225. And so those get tied together through this structure. But the data in the process, the data values actually are assigned to that machine, if you will, or that process. And a process can be any number of things that have inputs and outputs. In this case, it happens to be a machine. But because of the way that we've decided to organize our data model, if a data value is assigned to Lathe 225, it automatically gets assigned to the turning area, which then is part of the production department, which is part of the Linwood, Washington site, which is part of the consumer goods division, all the way up to the Boltco company. So it just comes automatically. So the roll-up is just there. So if you're going to establish a metrics model with roll-up, you need to have some way to tag that lowest level data value into this structure. So we talked about what metrics or what makes a good metric, the attributes of a good metric, and how to organize these through a roll-up. So now let's talk about what should we measure? And this reminds me of a story about getting to what to measure. Let's say that you've decided, after watching the animal shelter show every Saturday, you finally decide to go in and rescue a cat. And so you go to the animal shelter, you pick up a cute little cat, you bring it home, and you're discovering how we live with each other. And then you notice that there's some pick marks in your couch. You go, oh, dang it, the cat likes to scratch the couch. So I need to catch the cat doing it so I can try to correct the problem. So one day you're there, the cat walks up to the couch and starts clawing on it. So to try to correct the problem, you pick the cat up, you scold the cat, you toss it outside. And you think, okay, that's the problem solved there. We'll have to repeat that a few times, but eventually the cat will get the message. So the cat does it again, you scold the cat, toss it outside. But what you've just done is you've just taught the cat how to get outside. So you need to make sure that your metrics are rewarding the desired behavior. And think everything through. And if behaviors are kind of squirrely and aren't what you expect, logically think through and put yourself in the shoes of the person who has to live with these metrics and make sure that it's being rewarded properly. So what are the types of metrics that are out there? And back in the day when I started my career out of college, when numbers were collected, and this is back in the airframe business, when numbers were collected, the whole idea was to put those numbers, to verify that the plane was built per design, to put those values in a box and ship it off and hope you never have to look at them again. Because if someone has to pull that box of numbers back out to look at them, that means there's a problem with the plane or people have died or something like that. So we were motivated to never look at the data. Things have changed, though, today. So we want to look at the data. We're encouraged to look at them. But that transition was tough. Those of you that lived through that transition of burying the numbers to using them to make good business decisions. But numbers come in different ways depending on where you are in the corporation. But even so, raw numbers, you can't beat them. They're great. Sometimes they're exactly what you need, just some good raw data and no summary whatsoever put into it. Also, you may want to make those values relevant to something. So percentage of not meeting goal or percentage of meeting goal. So percents are good types of metrics. If you're in the manufacturing business especially, we're forever comparing things. We want to compare lot to lot, shift to shift, one employee versus another, quarter to quarter, different suppliers. So sometimes the metrics are going to be for comparison purposes, and nothing wrong with that. There's also composite metrics that are out there. So supplier scorecards, which take some value that represents a price and a schedule and a quality and adherence to price, schedule, and quality, and roll those up into some scorecard number, some number or composite number. Overall equipment effectiveness is a very popular metric today, but it's a composite of equipment availability, equipment performance, and then the quality of the output of that equipment. So these are different types of metrics that are out there. But what are the best metrics that we have? Well, the best metrics are, I saw a little message pop up. The best metrics that we have or to get are the ones that get used. So, and if you've read some papers I've written in the past, there was a story of a fellow that took over responsibility, and part of their job was to create these reports on some regular basis and distribute those reports out to people. Well, looking at all the massive amounts of work that went into building the reports, this person didn't know what was being used and what was important. So one of the first things that he did to try to make his life more streamlined and better serve his customers is he just stopped printing the reports. And then he waited by the phone to find out who called him. And so after a few weeks, he had enough conversations with the right people to find out, okay, here's the types of metrics that you need. I can serve you better doing this or that. I can stop publishing this. And so he was better at publishing what people needed. So the ones that get used are the best metrics. They're also the best metrics are the ones that answer your questions. So you've got to first have your questions. If you don't have your questions enabled or up front, then it's hard to know what you want to measure. So get your questions and then make sure that the metrics answer those questions. The questions might change over time. That's fine. You change the metrics accordingly. Now, those of you that are as old as me, you know who this guy is, Dr. W. Edwards Deming. He passed away about 20 years ago, but he happened to be alive back, 1989, 1990. I happened to see him, give a live presentation. If you don't know who he is, he's arguably the father of modern day quality today. And he did a lot during World War II to help reconstruct Japan. He publishes 14 Points as well as other publications that are out there. So he's very well respected in the quality world. But during his seminar that I went to, about 800 people were there, and but he went through all his admonitions and all of his 14 points. But at the end, when it came time to ask some questions, one guy stood up and asked him, well, of all the different initiatives that are out there and the things you're promoting, where do I start? I've got my zero defects program. We've got our quality circles. We've got our quality function deployment, fishbone diagrams, SPC. Where in the heck do we start? And here's his response. Start with the statistics, and everything else will follow. And that was it. That was his answer to the question. And so as an industrial statistician, I kind of translated that into don't worry about picking the right metrics to start. I mean, if we translate it into our discussion today, don't worry about where you start. Just gather data, and the data will guide you where to go next. So this actually promotes the concept of is top down better or bottom up. Using this philosophy, it doesn't really matter. Just start someplace, and then the data will guide you. What's the best way to break writer's block? Start writing, and then you eventually get past that. So just do something, but it's most important is you use the data that you collect and let the data drive you, what to do next. So let's finish up our discussion with part 4, and that is if we're going to collect metrics and we want to collect the right metrics, we also want to get a return on investment. And when we're dealing with return on investments, we've got different aspects to deal with, and that is we've got to deal with people. We've got to deal with our processes that are in place right now, and then ideally we want to take advantage of some technology that's out there. But the most important one is the people side of things. So from the people perspective, we've got to answer the question, if we're going to ask someone to collect something or do something or talk to somebody, something that's out of the norm, the first thing that's going on in somebody's head is, well, what's in it for me? And so, that's the same thing if when you decided to sign up for this seminar. And by the way, the last number that I got was there were 774 unique registrations for this seminar. So that's a phenomenal number. And so this is an important topic to many. So, but the question is, what's in it for me? Am I going to get anything out of this webinar? And so that's what you have to answer as well when you decide if you want to start collecting data, asking someone to do something. And so you may want to use the logical approach of, well, here's the big picture, and yeah, I get that, from the person that's being asked to do something. I get the big picture. I may even get, well, what's the local benefit there? What's the benefit to my site or even to my department? But really, what they're really focused in on is their own radio station, the WE-FM radio station, the what's in it for me. So you've got to deal with that. And there's various ways to deal with it, some way which is becoming, I think it's kind of hokey these days, but it still works at some level. You have some competitions, rewards, you give away things that people want, you might get some activity. But more better than this, even better is piece of the action. If this truly is tied back to, if we make improvements in these areas, it ties back to profitability of the company. It should be nice if I'm going to help the company achieve these goals to get a piece of the action. So that would get even better buy-in. But somehow you've got to establish value to that individual, or you're just not going to get the buy-in. Now, sometimes you're also just going to have to make it a requirement. And if it's not a requirement, it's just not going to get done. And you know that. You may not have ever heard it quite said that way, but you know it, that once something becomes a requirement, it gets done. And that's because, suggestions, encouragements, those things don't work. They don't necessarily always work with our kids. They hardly ever work with our kids, and they're not going to work with humans in general, because as humans, especially as adults, there's any number of things we know we should be doing, but we don't do it until someone puts their foot down and makes it a requirement. Then that gives us the strength, if you will, the desire to move forward and to do the right thing. I mean, forever the government has been trying to persuade us using suggestions and encouragement and logical arguments to use the dollar coin. But until they outlaw and take dollar bills out of circulation, we're never going to adopt the dollar coin. It's just not going to happen. So that's the people side of things. The next is the process. Or no, I'm sorry. There's one more people side of this, and that is we have to get used to doing something different and doing something new. And so there's a philosophy out there about if you repeat something 9 times, that's how you change a habit. And so changing habits, there's lots of habits we'd like to change, and so that rule of thumb of 9 times seems to work pretty good. And let's use this to talk about switching a habit of going from Mountain Dews to water. Now, I love Mountain Dews, and I was raised on Mountain Dews. I'm a Tennessee boy, and that's what I like. And I was over at a buddy's house. This was a couple of years ago when I made this change, but I was over at a buddy's house, and I was there, and I was thirsty. I live in Arizona, so I get thirsty all the time. And I asked him for something to drink, and he said, "Well, I've got water in the fridge." And it's like, "Oh, yuck! You got anything better than that?" And he goes, "No, water's all I have." And so I asked him, "Well, how can you drink water?" And he said, "I crave it." And I said, "Well, how did you do it? Because I know water's better for me." And he just said, "I just told myself for 1 week I'm going to drink nothing but water." And that's all it took. And so that's all it took for me. 1 week I did nothing but water, and now I crave water. I love it. Those of you that are in the marketing world, there's a book that I read called Guerrilla Marketing years ago. And they also taught the same philosophy, that you may get a message out to a prospect one time, and you think the message was so good, of course they listened to it and saw it. And if they need it, they're going to respond to it. But that's not true. They may need what you have. They like the message. It works for them. But unless you get it out there in their face 9 times, they're not going to respond to it. So you just keep repeating the message over and over again until the right people see the message. Same with going to the gym. You go 9 times. You go 2 or 3 times, you've made the switch, really. So you just got to make these activities daily activities. And so there's nothing like having morning meetings, for even if they're just little 15-minute stand-up meetings, to talk about the various needs of the day. So incorporate these morning meetings. Also, if you start getting in the habit of these morning meetings where we're top level and people are collaborating, it becomes exciting, and literally people look forward to getting together and discussing what the problems they have and working together to solve those problems. So that's the people side of things. So next is the process. And so at the process, we have to be very careful if we're going to embark down a path of, whether we're doing top down or bottom up, we're going to start collecting things and responding to the data, that we need to manage the scope. We all want to solve problems, and they're bigger than us in many ways. But if you're going to start collecting data collection takes time. Responding to the data takes time, so you've got to establish the right boundaries and not try to do everything at once. And because we want to be successful with our activities, because success breeds more success. So we want to get the quick wins. somewhere, I think it was Covey, that said that if we're going to embark on improving ourselves or improving anything, we want to work 80, 90% on the activity to make the improvement, but then spend 10, 20% advertising what we're doing. So it promotes, we want to promote ourselves and encourage people also to jump on board and do this and do the right thing. So then we also want to use whatever process we have in place. We want to make sure that when we start labeling our activities, that we have to have naming conventions. So if you've ever dealt with data, especially if you're trying to pull different data systems together to have a common language, naming conventions is one of the first milestones, I guess, we have to overcome. We've got to find out what naming conventions are out there and come up with common names. So just things as simple as if one person calls it temperature and another person calls it temp, there's a problem. That data will not talk to each other, especially if you're using some technology. It can't talk to each other. And then you also need to organize your data into a hierarchy so you truly can't take advantage of the roll-up. So the last part of this is the technology side. So if you're going to deal with quality metrics, ideally you want to have all these metrics in a single hub. So the hub can then be the channel and the vehicle used to roll things up and down through the corporate hierarchy. But it may require some integration, and that's because today each company is going to have their silos of information. They're going to have their LIMS systems and ERP systems and MES and SAP. They're all doing very important tasks that are out there. People are off doing their Excel and mini tabs as well to manage their data. And I'm not promoting getting rid of all those. You want to maintain those systems to do what they're supposed to do because they're all optimized for their function. But we have to get what we need for our metrics, our quality metrics, into one spot, which is going to require integration. And today, with the way back-end databases are organized, it's all doable now to integrate things. So I'm not suggesting replacing your data islands, but I am suggesting to spend the effort and time to find out where the touch points are and integrate those together. Also, take advantage of the cool factor. Anymore, we do our work on computers, and with these mobile devices that connect to the internet, they can also become our means of data acquisition as well as our means of reporting the data. And it's kind of cool to walk around with our little devices and do work like this. Also, in the world of the flat 24/7 global world, we've got all these time zones. So it's a 24-hour data flow, and there's no time lags between these. And so take advantage of the universal or coordinated universal time, the UTC time stamping, if you will. So this way, UTC, if you're going to have this quality hub, the UTC timestamps will allow the data to sit in the 24-hour clock in the hub, but as someone from different parts of the world are pulling on that data, it'll also be organized in their time zone. So take advantage of that as well. That's a challenge that we had to overcome as well as we were putting our technology together for our quality hub. So final thoughts on this is, increased visibility around quality builds our credibility. So just having the numbers gives us confidence to do more. It gives us credibility in the directions that we take, and we instruct others to go in. So customer has always been number one. Customer is still number one. So but we have to know that they're more educated than they've ever been, and they're getting even more educated these days. And we need to focus on the outputs. And if we're going to build performance and profitability and productivity, then we need to provide that scoreboard that everyone knows the score, and it has to live in the right structure in our corporate hierarchy, and that we have to deal with people, processes, and technology. So those are the final thoughts on this. And so at this point, we're about 3 minutes ahead, about 2.5 minutes ahead of our 45-minute schedule. So I'll open it up now for questions and answers. And Ed, I don't know if you've got anything has come in yet.
Thanks, Steve. Very illuminating again. Yes, a few questions have started to come over, and I've been chatting with some folks as well. You can continue to submit questions using the Q&A drop-down tab, or if you want, I'm monitoring the chat as well, so go ahead and add your questions there. First, from Chad, and Chad is in a situation where they are collecting a lot of data but not doing enough with it yet. They have a goal of trying to benchmark with OEE. Is that a good place to start?
Okay, so it's kind of two questions there. The one is they're collecting a lot of data but not doing much with it. That's a very common scenario that we're a lot of times we're data rich, information poor, and so we have to connect the dots. Maybe you're collecting data, but have you gone back to find out what what questions are you trying to answer with the data? And is it providing visibility in the areas that are of interest to people? What problems are you trying to solve? So maybe that part needs to be addressed as well. Also, is the data being structured in such a way that it can be understood? And I promoted the concept of raw data. Raw data is good in its place, but if you're collecting reams of data and you're presenting a spreadsheet of those reams of raw data points, it's not very consumable. So there's a lot of tools that are out there, statistical tools, that will help you make pictures of the data, histograms, box and whisker plots, even control charts, and promote those to get your points across as well. So make sure that the data can be understood by the customers. Now, the OEE part, that's not a bad place to start. There's a lot of companies that are adopting OEE. And so that helps. That becomes the goal, if you will, the focus, the scorecard that people focus on is that OEE. So that then drives into, well, how am I going to capture my process availabilities? How am I going to get the performance of that? How am I going to measure my quality? Puts people in the right perspective. And so if availability has an issue, then we need to look at whatever is upstream that's causing my availability issues. So OEE truly is a bottom-up type of metric. So we're getting the results at the end and then driving upstream changes to make that OEE better. So I'm a real proponent of bottom-up tools and OEE. There's a lot of material out there today. There's even more learnings of how to roll up OEE across multiple processes and multiple sites, and there's some exciting things going on with OEE. As a matter of fact, we've got Infinity QS has a product called Insight, which is a web-based KPI tool. And we're about to release an OEE component in there as well. So we believe in the value of having that available to our clients.
Sounds good. And we're getting a few questions about the recording of the webinar. And just to let everybody know, we'll send the recording in an email, a follow-up email, sometime within the next day. So we'll send an email. There'll be a link so you can record or have an archive of the recording, and we'll send you the slides as well, so you can download the slides and use them internally if you need to. Question from, I hope I don't get it wrong, but Ramakrishnan. For customer complaints, is number of complaints a metric or complaints/order? Is that a good metric? I guess you're probably looking for usefulness of, go on.
Yeah. So number of complaints is a raw data value. And sometimes the number of complaints, and there's nothing wrong with that. You've got to start with the raw data. But then with that raw data, if you tag it to other bits of information like what was the product, what region was the product shipped into, what was the rev number of the product, what you mentioned order, what order number was it on, who was the customer that's complaining, all these other tags, if you will, that get tied to the data, then allow you to mine that raw data into things more meaningful. So just getting the raw number of customer complaints is excellent. If you also knew, how much product was shipped during a given time, maybe there's time lags there, make it relevant to what's being shipped, make it relevant to the how mature is the product they're complaining on. So new products tend to get more complaints than mature products, hopefully. So the more you tie to the data, the more you're going to be able to mine it and make something meaningful out of it. So is complaints per order a valid metric? Absolutely. If you're trying to minimize and get exposure of complaints per order, if that makes it more relevant. So what's a good metric is going to be different depending on what you've got tied to the data, what questions you're trying to answer with the data, and basically that's it. So they're both fine, but regardless, you always want your metrics, no matter how you report it and how you roll it up, you need to get to the raw data. And when it comes time from a statistical perspective, if I'm working with a client and they're giving me the average of something or the standard deviation of something, I don't want that number. What I want is the raw data from which they calculated their average or their standard deviation or whatever other metric they're rolling up from that raw data. I want the raw data and let me do what I think is important with it. So, customer complaint count is great.
Sure. And Tadashi is asking, can you recommend any resources or reference material on creating internal scorecards?
Yeah, that's I really can't. I mean, what I do if I'm challenged with something like this is I go, like, I'll type in scorecard and what kind of scorecard is it? Maybe you put those keywords in, and then just search on the images side of Google, and that gives me some pictures of how people have organized things. And then based on what I've seen other people do, and then I might research and actually go to the website or dig deeper into why they chose certain things and cobble my own solutions together. But so I just steal from other people's ideas and modify it for my own needs. So I really can't. There's so many resources out there today just through searching. I would just do that. And then eventually that might lead you to a book or a paper or something that you want it to follow more precisely. But that's how I would start. I wish I had a better answer for you than that.
We'll take it. And this is from Mark. And Mark is in the food business, and he's wondering where to get reference data on how many companies or how companies compare to others in complaints per million. Have you seen anything like that?
That would almost have to be at a governing body level to get any of that. I mean, that's sensitive information, right? I mean, I'd love to know about our competitors, but if we want the information, we have to go do it ourselves. So unless there's a governing body whose their job is to maintain these quality complaints, if that's what we're focusing on, then that's where you'd have to go, or otherwise commission your own research somehow and keep the data to yourself.
And there's a few research analyst firms out there that may have some of this data available.
So because you work in the research side of things more so than I do, Ed. Do you have any?
Yeah, I would say Gartner, LNS Research, they've been very strong in the last few years. It's a newer research firm, but I found a lot of interesting industry information, especially on OEE at LNS. But Gartner, Aberdeen, LNS would be my recommendations to start.
But that data's not free, is it?
It depends. You get into the website, and some of it you can get to. Gartner, certainly not, but there might be some free data available.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Ed.
Sure. Coming from Carrie, you mentioned early on that quality would be a driver of corporate profitability. How do you recommend tackling the challenge of linking operational performance to customer satisfaction and then link customer satisfaction to financial performance?
Well, it's of course going to be different depending on the industry you're in and what types of information you're collecting. But customer complaints is certainly one way to track that. Use the information to go out and win new business as well. If you've got a good track record with your own customers, you've got good quality systems and metrics in place. Use that to go and promote your business to win new business. I think that's probably where I like focusing most is be proactive with the knowledge you have about your customers, and use that to go win more business. And then, the metrics and the things that are out there today are constantly evolving. The tools that we have to track how our products and services are being perceived in the marketplace. If there's some way to tap into those streams, and Ed is part of that side of our business. But then use that to link what types of metrics you want to collect, and then have that drive changes internally. But ultimately, I mean, it all boils down to we have a service, our products, we sell those, and we get money for it. And the more, and it can be measured on number of sales, the size of sales, market share percent. If you're in an industry where there is a known market size of the market. But the devil's in the details, and it all depends on you've got to draw your matrix out, and here's my corporate level profitability. Here's what I want to track at the bottom. Can I make that logical correlation to activity at the process level to the top that will give me that correlation? And it's not always a objective type of measurement, but you have to go through the exercise and do it. So there's no one magic bullet for that. You just have to you look at your own situation and come up with those links.
And it's another continuous improvement project I've found. And just a note on the complaints per million, I'm getting a note that ASQ is currently doing a study and hoping to release it soon. So.
Oh, excellent.
And on Infinity QS capabilities, Amanda's asking what kind of quality metrics are available in the platform beyond your traditional CP, CPK.
Right. Well, there's those traditional CP and CPK. There's the we started out in the world of measuring variability, and so a lot of our tools are around tracking variability. And so as the metrics that a company, as far as the counts and customer complaints and how many observations you've had of certain things or things that didn't happen, those all become items that you can track. They're just numbers. So it's not a metrics per se from the raw data perspective that we have a suite of offerings. You come up with the values that you want. That can be attribute checks in the form of pass-fail. They can be defects type things where you're classifying findings and just raw numerical values. And then based on that, you come up with your own roll-up summaries of averages and standard deviations and number of hits. We have where you can tie, for a value, you can also tie a weighting to it, so we can do weighted values as well. We've got the ability to do Pareto charts, various reports, box and whisker plots, capability analysis with those. So, but then on the insight is also going to be a place where we're going to have the different gauges for the dashboards, and OE will be in there as well. So just good old statistical roll-up tools that are out there as far as percentages and counts and composites.
And we're getting close to the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We'll take one more question. I'll also stay online with the chat if anybody wants to stay after, and you can shoot in some more questions. I can either answer them myself or shoot them to the appropriate authority and get you a good answer. But this is coming from Glenn, and part of the challenge for Glenn is getting people to react to data, is educating them on what the data is telling them. Is this a common problem, and what's the quickest and most effective way to overcome it?
Of course it's common. It's you may understand precisely what the data is saying, but if you've not connected the dots to what's in it for me type of thing, and how does that benefit what I'm personally trying to do, then they may understand it, but you may not get buy-in. You might just be something like that. If they truly don't understand it, you've got to come up with different ways to show how it works. As a statistician teaching, it goes back many years when I was in the world of just teaching pure play SPC, the concept of control limits versus spec limits was a struggle always, because my customers in the class lived in the world of spec limits, and I was trying to teach control limits, and they're two totally very different things. But I had to modify my training style and the way I peeled the onion to where they saw the contrast. So maybe if you understood what they do know, and then contrast that and see the gap between what you're trying to teach them, and if you can point out the differences, then as an adult, I've learned it the way we learned it, once we can see the differences between what I know and what you're trying to teach me, then I can see what you're teaching me. So maybe focus on the differences is another way to get at that. But that's always a challenge if you're trying to promote something new and they don't get it. If you can go and make pictures or dissect things down to its smallest components and understand each step of the way and to reach the final goal. So that's just a classic example of getting someone to a level of understanding. But of course it's very common.
Well, great. Steve, thank you much for providing the insight. I think we've provided some real value for our attendees. Thank you all for attending. Again, I'll stay on the chat if anybody has any additional questions, and shoot them over to Steve or whatever expert I can direct them to. So that wraps up our presentation today. Have a great afternoon.